afternoon, YouTube. Tire Metalhead Weatherman here. Hopefully, you guys are doing well. It's been a pretty quiet weekend. We'll start to see some activity towards the latter half of it, mainly through tomorrow. We'll discuss a little bit of the atmospheric river then, but there's also stuff down the line that we're going to have to be keeping a close eye on here. One of those things is going to be our severe threat, and that's for now a day 6 slight risk. Although day 7 and day 8, there also could be risk applicable for those as well. Big storm system could be coming through with a pretty robust looking trough. We'll get more and more into those perimeters as time goes on, but there's also a lot of winter weather potential as time goes on as well. So we're just going to go ahead and dive in and cover it all. So we'll start out looking at the Euro, of course, as we usually do. We're going to look at the vorticity. So also give us a slight idea of what the moisture returns could be like. So starting out, we're mainly just dealing with the big cold air mass that's going to be hanging around the eastern half of the U.S. and then the northern tier of the U.S. as well. And through the early part of the week, the cold air is going to be dominating. But as we head towards Tuesday afternoon, we can start to see that zonal flow coming back in. But this is also indicative of warm air beginning to return across the southern half of the U.S. This will be what sets the stage for an upcoming severe weather event, mainly starting around Thursday and then continuing on into Friday. So there's two sectors here that I'm watching really closely. So as this storm system rolls in, usually by about Thursday evening is what I've been seeing on the models. From what I've seen here, main area to watch has been here so far. In particular, I've been watching not only over Oklahoma and Texas, but I'm also keeping a close eye on Missouri here too. Mark this with a little bit of an X right here. There seems to be enough of a warm sector present to where these guys could be in play for some severe weather as well. And then as we drag things onward, we eventually even see the southeast coming into play as well. Could see the lower Ohio Valley and Tennessee valleys getting into play here as we head in towards Friday afternoon. So this is where our secondary area is going to come into play. The Euro doesn't really show it quite in the same kind of abundance as the GFS does, but across the board, I've still noticed a slight trend here. I think Dixie Alley also could be in the action earlier in the day. It really depends on a few other variables. I think moisture return is going to be questionable across the southeast. I think moisture returns across even the Tennessee Valley could be questionable, or at least according to the Euro it could be. But Friday could also be pretty active too. So we drag this onward into Saturday. Looks like the threat probably diminishes from that point, but we'll keep an eye on that and see how it goes. It could be an early morning threat. Go ahead and clear those off. And then towards the start of the week after, which will be the following of this upcoming week, we could see another big time storm system coming in, and then there's a little low pressure that tries to develop off the southeastern Gulf Coast here. I have to see what that ends up yielding, but we could see wintry weather across the northeast as well as the Great Lakes. Then after that, we have to watch towards the end of the month for both the atmospheric river and another robust storm system to close out March. That's how it looks on the Euro. Here's a look at the GFS. Okay, I'm trying to get it to go here. But GFS has a very similar look starting out. But it's not really until we get into Wednesday where we start to see a few key differences here. It seems like there's a little bit more intense of a moisture return here. Also, it seems like the storms fire a little bit later with this and fire a little further to the north. Not to mention that warm sector does look like it makes it a little further north here. And this is where I start paying more attention to Missouri, because you can see this little cluster right here that's developed. Then over here towards the southeast, the forcing looks subtle, but look at the warm sector that's popped up here. Once I see areas getting above 576 to 582 on the vorticity here, I'm always watching it those isobars because that's usually indicative of some pretty warm air. We can also see these little small yellow streaks here. Usually when you see that coming from the Gulf of Mexico, that's usually indicative of moisture return. So looks like the southeast is better to play here when it comes to severe potential on Friday evening. Depending on how that turns out, we could even live stream that. There's a few things that that foam breaking down was kind of a positive for. And one way could be to control the live stream from my phone as well. So we'll see what happens with that. So that storm system's out of here, and that's for this upcoming week. And then the next storm system will be around the start of the week after. Some pretty cold air seems to mix in with this storm system as well. We do see another warm sector begin to emerge over the southeast, almost in the form of a ridge. And depending on if we can get some kind of moisture return, this could also start to become a pretty notable severe event. One question is, of course, the forcing. The forcing is pretty subtle here too, though. So if any severe storms were to form with this setup, could be discrete, could be some tornadic trouble with that. But this system also looks like it's neutrally tilted, so this could yield a little bit of an issue with moisture return and also just overall convective dynamics. We start to see a setup emerge around the 27th that kind of leans a little bit more into flooding across the Tennessee Valley and then the southeast. To close out the month of March across this region here, we could see multiple days of showers and thunderstorms, some of which could still be severe. But considering how we're drawing closer and closer to no man's land, this is something that we have to take with a grain of salt, but it is something that has to be making the radar here. So after that, we start to see those cold temperatures begin to return across the west as we start to shift what looks to be back into a negative PNA pattern. And then we start to see maybe multiple storm systems beginning to develop for the month of April across this region too. I think the start of April could end up being very active if this is the trend that we will continue to see through the course of the next few days here. So it's springtime, and we know how this time of year tends to be. So there's no surprises here. Hopefully you're prepared. Hopefully you're doing what you need to in these when these weather situations start emerging. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the temperatures could be like. As we mentioned before, we're pretty much going to be starting out this week relatively cold, especially across the eastern half of the U.S. Northern states could be dealing with some wind chill issues, but towards the middle of the week, we can start to see that warm air beginning to return across the southern plains and then eventually spreading throughout the southeast. By the time we get into Thursday, widespread 70-degree plus temperatures, 80 degrees even for some places further to the south like Florida, southern Georgia, maybe even southern Texas here as time goes on. Then as we go towards Friday, that warm sector is still persistent across a large portion of the southeast, even getting into the mid-Atlantic now. And then by the time we get into the following week after this upcoming week, we're starting to see that cold air begin to try to take over. But if we pick up where the Euro left off with the GFS, it's a pretty similar deal. So we go ahead and drag this out. We see what's happening on the weekend, the upcoming weekend. And then here we are towards the 27th, 28th, and then boom, here's that cold air. And then guess what happens right after the 240-hour mark? Boom. Warm sector takes back over as we head towards the very end of the month, towards the 30th and the 31st. And then day after day, we'll start to see that cold air begin to retreat more and then eventually push its way back out towards the west as we start out the month of March. Or April, excuse me. Man, this month went by pretty quick, it feels like. It always does whenever you're covering the weather here. But that being said, did not mean to show that snowfall map. Go ahead and look at what the precip could be. It's going to be a pretty active next couple of weeks from the looks of things. Like I said, we're starting out pretty quiet right now. But things look like they will be changing pretty quickly here. So we do see some activity begin to develop around late Saturday night and early Sunday morning. And then through Monday, this will be persistent across the Rockies, where we'll see a little bit of snowfall here. Towards the valleys, mostly going to be rain. It's going to be light starting out, but as time goes on here comes our next big system. Some colder temperatures are going to be associated with it, so towards the higher elevations, we're going to start to see more snow coming into play here. Then as we draw this further and further out, we begin to see that cold air begin to shift its way in towards the western half of the U.S. Meanwhile, the severe weather threat mostly looks linear right now, but there could be a few embedded supercells along this area here. We could end up seeing multiple rounds here across Texas and Oklahoma here. Depending on how things develop here, this could either enhance or limit the severe threat. But we could look at Fort Worth and Dallas maybe catching some storms early Friday morning here, and then later in the day we see this big line of storms take over. This could be a massive damaging wind event, maybe some embedded supercells in there, hard to tell right now. Then we'll start to see some snow wrap around on the backside of the system towards the lower Ohio Valley, mainly across the Great Lakes. Could see some brief periods of significant snow across the Great Lakes. Then after that system sneaks out. We see the small little clipper come in after the fact. Could see a little bit of snow, again, mainly going to be towards the southern end of the Great Lakes. This storm tries to become a nor'easter, but just really runs out of time based off what the Euro is showing us. And we go with the GFS. It's a little bit of a different look. When we always get into stuff like nor'easters, that's when things kind of get a little bit tricky and get a little wacky. But when we start out, it's a pretty similar look. Snow's a little bit more intense looking on the GFS as far as out west is concerned, especially towards the Rockies. Much bigger storm comes in. A little bit more moisture available with the GFS on this one in comparison to the Euro. And then when we draw this out towards Wednesday, it's a pretty similar deal. The severe weather threat seems to be a little bit further to the north starting out. Could see even a few severe storms over towards the lower part of the Ohio Valley. And really the severe side doesn't really develop as quickly with the southeast as far as the line is developed. It looks like it'll be more of a late Friday evening, early Saturday morning type event. Then as time goes on, we see this next big storm system coming around the start of the 26th to 27th. Big time snow could be possible across the Midwest here. And then we'll start to see maybe a small chance of a couple of severe storms begin to develop, but the flood threat really looks like is what the main story will be throughout the start of a couple weeks out from now. As time goes on, here's that low that I was talking about. Could see some severe weather towards the Gulf Coast possibly. For the most part, I lean more towards no. Could be a small pocket here in the higher elevations of the Appalachians here where we could see a little bit of snow developing there. Then that storm system gets out. Then we're going to watch an increased train of storms begin to develop over the same areas that we've been seeing a lot of snow. Unfortunately, you guys know who you are. Minnesota, Wisconsin, but also with that clash of warm air, ice could become a possibility here. Of course, I know we're near no man's land, so there's a lot of changes ahead as far as what these days will look like heading into April. But based off what I'm seeing here, it wouldn't surprise me to see an ice storm or two develop since we keep on shifting in between seasons. That's pretty much what we have going on precip potential so far. Let's go ahead and take a look at what our snowfall could look like. I'm not going to really read into the ice just yet since we're so far out at this point. I'm mainly just going to be looking at the next 10 days. The perfect indicator with this is looking at all three of the main global models. You can see the increased activity out west with snow as time goes on. Most of this is going to be towards the latter half of the 10 days versus the first 5 days. I think, of course, we already know who's going to be the big winner as usual. I feel good seeing that the Sierra Nevada is getting plenty of snow, whereas in the last couple of years they've been struggling with drought. So this is definitely going to put a huge dent in it. Before we know it, who knows? Maybe a lot of the state of California could be out of drought, which would be nice. But all the damage that we've seen just kind of leaves me a little conflicted with that. Is it really worth it? You know what I'm saying? But we can also see a hot spot develop between the Dakotas here too for potential snow through the next 10 days. Some areas could see up to about 6 inches plus, maybe even some locally higher totals. Then, of course, Wisconsin, Minnesota, we're watching you closely. Chicago, you could be in line for some pretty significant snow over the next 10 days. In total, over that course of time, you could see possibly up to 11 inches. Then through areas like Detroit, Lansing, a lot of you guys over here in Michigan, you've been getting pelted with or walloped with snowstorm after snowstorm. Unfortunately, it looks like it could be a similar situation here. The totals on the Northeast also are pretty impressive here too, especially over towards Maine, where these storm systems are jumping north of the border but kind of straddling it more or less. So if you're on the right side of the system, you could end up seeing some pretty hefty snowfall, especially towards the higher elevations, where those temperatures will still be below freezing and you'll be able to get just enough of a moisture return. Towards the Adirondacks, you could end up seeing some pretty significant snow too, up to a foot possibly over the next 10 days. And then off the Great Lakes, there's always that chance for increased snowfall as well. And this is what the Euro is showing us. GFS and the Canadian are pretty similar in detail there. Totals are actually a little bit lighter with the GFS than the Canadian as far as conditions out west. But there's more of a bullseye over here, a little bit further south here. We can see South Dakota and Nebraska getting into the action here. Even Iowa starts to get some heavier snow from the looks of this. So here's what here's the Canadian. Canadian's leaning a little further to the north than the GFS by just a little bit, but fact of the matter is both of them are showing a pretty similar look here. It'll be interesting to see how this snow line ends up developing over the next couple of days here. Last thing to really look at now is more so the blend of models. Blend of models, of course, is usually the best of both worlds here. Gives us slightly more realistic totals. Toward the Adirondacks, we could see about 6 to 8 inches. That seems pretty fair to me at this point. But this can easily uptrend or down, upward or downward. So we'll have to, of course, be keeping a close eye on what our totals could end up being, how our storm systems end up strengthening or dissolving. There's a lot that goes into that. Towards the Sierras, pretty much academic here. We already know these guys are going to get slammed out west from the looks of it. It's a storm system after storm system going there. Bullseye, of course, definitely seems like it's going to be over the Dakotas, but we can't rule out areas like Iowa and Nebraska getting into the action here too. Then, of course, towards the Northeast, Maine, big talking point there, 8 to 10 inches. Some areas even getting up to a foot. Locally higher totals and higher elevations as well. We could even see New York City getting into the action here. Oddly enough, the blend of models is kind of stiffing Chicago a little bit here, and even Detroit. So that's going to be interesting to see how that develops there. But with those storm tracks, that's going to be a gray area as we continue to draw forward here. We'll get better answers. But that's the end of this video here. If you guys enjoyed it, you know what to do. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video because this is gonna be getting pretty active here pretty soon. So just make sure you're on your toes because this is gonna get interesting since we keep on shifting between seasons. Collision of warm and cold air is prevalent, and we all know what that usually ends up entailing. That being said, of course, also let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. Hopefully, are you looking forward to this? Are you not? Are you just ready for the weather to make up its mind? Let me know. Feel free. I always love responding to comments. I always love reading the comments. That being said, though, this has been Tire Metalhead Weatherman. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Till then, take care and have a good Saturday.